Hello everyone, and welcome back to part 3 of our critical look at Shadow of the Colossus. The first thing you might notice that I've cut out a fair bit of travel time here, and that's for two reasons. One, I want to make sure that we get to the meat and bones of the critique very quickly. I don't want a lot of dead space between moments. Also, I don't think we need to contemplate the game world as much as we did with something like Far Cry 4. The effect of the game world is very immediate. It's a large space, it makes us feel smaller, it impresses upon us how weak Wander is, and also just how powerful any of the other things in this space must be. I want you to note the use of shadow here. This will be the first time that we encounter an area where a Colossus is, where there's a lot of fog, shadow, and clouds. This will be a recurrent theme, and by the end of the game, we'll actually be engaging Colossi rather, a mistake I keep on making, in some fairly dark areas. So there's a shift from light to dark in this game. Also, if we look over to where we're going to fight, it's almost a literal arena, which makes sense because the boss that we're going to fight is highly militarized in imagery. Getting to the boss is one thing entirely. Swimming in Shadow of the Colossus is an absolute bitch. You have to swim underwater if you want to move at any high speed, and that drains your stamina very quickly. You can do some little gameplay tricks in order to avoid that. Mostly you just jump up and you do a little breath, and that lets you move a little faster. It's unfortunate though, because it's sort of a point where there's actually a little bit of immersion that's being broken because of the game systems. And with so few game systems that exist, so few mechanics and abstractions, it really stands out. You might notice that my stamina gauge here is a lot smaller than the stamina gauge I had in my previous fights against Colossi. This is for two reasons. One is that I actually wanted to show off the effect that a small stamina meter can have in a fight, and I admit that the second reason is more practical. I'm going to try and do some pretty complex maneuvers in fighting this next Colossus, and if I fail those maneuvers, well, I need a save file that's close to the fight. This means that I have to use this save file, which has less stamina. Getting to the Colossus is pretty difficult. You have to make a very tricky jump, and then you have to make another jump to the actual arena. It's almost as if somebody didn't want us to reach the Colossus. There's some implied environmental storytelling that's going on here, and I think it's rather interesting. Even a jump like this can be difficult to do. Grabbing onto the ledge takes a little bit of precision. This is our third Colossus, Gaius. His name means to rejoice in Latin. That's not very important. The usage of the name, though, does have a little bit of significance. Julius Caesar's first name was Gaius. Caligula's name was Gaius. Caesar Augustus's name was Gaius. There are many Roman generals that also use the name. So Gaius in our mind can be associated with an image of power or the military, which makes sense because Gaius wears armor, has a sword, and is one of the first colossi that we encounter that really goes out of its way to attack us. We're trying to manipulate Gaius into swinging its sword at us. If we can do this quickly, the fight's not as much of a pain. However, manipulating Colossi into doing what you want them to do can be a little tricky. Their AI's not that sophisticated, and it's really just a matter of positioning, but still, they sort of run on their own as these automaton, a term that we've used before when talking about Valis. It's present in the game world also. Their AI is very basic. So actually, something happened right there that I wasn't intending. In order to weaken Gaius, you can make him swing his sword into the center platform of the arena. That will break off his armor. Still, I want to see if I can do our fancier trick here, which is going to involve grabbing onto Gaius' sword and jumping to the middle of his torso. You can also jump from the tip of Gaius' sword to Gaius' head, which is something we might try if I fail this trick right here. In this case, I need to get up the sword fairly quickly and climb up. And when he raises the sword, I'm going to need to leap to his body. So from here, I need to jump like this. And I've actually pulled it off. So now I'm at the center of Gaius' body where I can attack his weak point, instead of taking the traditional route up his arm, where I actually can attack the weak point on his head. To be honest, I'm kind of amazed I pulled that one off. So this is Gaius' first weak point. Not too hard to deal with. If you actually attack him from up high, you sort of have to fall down on his back. That weak point remains, but we want to try and do some fun stuff. So we're going to try and jump onto Gaius' sword again, and maybe climb up his arm, just to show the traditional route. He swings his sword around fairly rapidly here, so it's going to be a little difficult for us to go where we want to go. However, if we shimmy along the edge, we should be able to do it. I don't want to squander the opportunity I had by jumping up to Gaius the way that I did. However, I don't want to risk any tricky maneuvers again, such as jumping from the tip of the sword to his head, because that's really technical, and probably something only consistent that, speedrunners can do. So we get to show off both the traditional way to fight Gaius, which is by using the environment, and also we get to understand that the Colossi exist as these true, strong, landscape items in the game world. So even if I didn't take advantage of the environmental puzzle, and I'll call it a puzzle even though it's very simple, I still can find ways to confront the Colossi because they exist truly as these real objects in the game world, which I think makes the Colossi very powerful and very enjoyable, both as a puzzle and interesting as objects, or as beings within the game space. And you can see, Gaius is a little tougher, and hopefully I won't fall off because that would be embarrassing. But Gaius can take a few more hits, especially if you're not careful with how you use your sword. But this impresses the notion that as we progress with our Colossi, that they get a little tougher. Here I'm almost falling, and you can see that my grip gauge is getting really close to running out. Gaius doesn't have a lot of places where I can hold on to his body and not worry about all of this. So I really want to get off my sword stab pretty quick. But Gaius is moving around a lot, which is a problem. It's entirely possible I'll fall off. So the grip gauge mechanic is very good for stressing how weak Wander is, but it also can be a little annoying. Falling off of Gaius is going to cost me a lot of time, and I'm almost about to do it here. So I actually have to take a little bit of a risk here, and let go of my grip gauge and stand upon Gaius' neck. It doesn't get me that much grip, but it should get me enough to go back up to where I want to go and stab the sword finally. There's not a lot of things for us to interpret with Gaius, besides the name and his militaristic image and what that might imply. Otherwise, it's a fairly simple boss fight. Once again, I'm having a little bit of trouble here. This is probably one of the most troublesome Gaius fights I've ever had, and it will be really embarrassing if I fall down. I'm completely running out of grip at this point, so I need to get back on the back. Back on the back, a little bit of a redundant term. But you can see, standing around gets me grip very easily, and there are occasional safe spots on each Colossus that you can take advantage of in order to get stamina back. We won't worry about that in later fights because I'll actually be using the other save file, but for now, you can see how difficult it makes each fight. And here, Gaius just doesn't seem to be doing what I want him to do. I've gotten rid of his one weak point, but I need to take care of the other one on his stomach again. So actually we're going to try and do a little bit of another trick. We're going to drop down his back here, and hopefully land on this platform. There we go, perfect. Another example of the Colossi as these living, actual things in the game space. So we'll jump onto his last weak point, and hopefully he won't toss us around too much, and we'll finish him off. Gaius is actually one of my favorite fights in the game, and I think he gets a lot of notice from the fans too, because it's the first time you have to deal with a Colossus that's really imposing. Valus isn't too difficult, and Quadratus might be interesting, but Gaius is the first time we encounter a Colossus that's truly threatening. It's also a Colossus that makes us beg a certain question. Why does he have the sword? Why is he armored? Why does he seem to have so much hostility towards us? Is he protecting something? Was he used as a weapon at some point? There's all this implicit history that comes by just examining the body of one single enemy in the game. And it's also a thing that allows the player, once again, to imbue the game world with some meaning. And as always, we'll return to our central location at the shrine. And the more Colossi we kill, the more these shadowy figures surround Wander. Eventually it's going to get really unsettling. I want to note that those figures have a certain childlike quality to them. It's hard to explain what that might signify, but I'm sure that people can read into it in multiple ways. We'll once again hear from Dorman, and then we'll move on to our next Colossus, which will also be an environmental puzzle that can be a little tricky. As we move through some of the Colossi, we'll encounter more of them that are animal-like. In the next section, you'll see that this one is even more of an animal than Quadratus was. So that was Section 3. Gaius is a really interesting fight, and I hope I showed off some fun maneuvers that you can do in this game. Finding the weak points in Colossi, I'm going to keep on doing that for the entire commentary. Finding their weak points and taking advantage of the environmental puzzles is interesting, but also you can just approach each Colossi as its own physical space that you need to overcome. In some cases, this can even be faster than doing the traditional method. I hope you enjoyed what you saw, hope it was exciting, and I hope you stay with me into the next part. Thank you very much. I'll see you soon. Bye.